In this video, we're going to be working on Lazy Jake, a subscriber-owned truck that he just bought. And the previous owner failed to mention that the Jakes don't really work. Of course, they come on and they make noise. They don't really do anything. Why is that? Well, in this video, we're going to be trying to figure out why that is. Is it mechanical? Electrical? Hydraulic? Well, in this video, we're going to be going over almost all those systems to try to figure it out. Also, we'll be finding a few other problems with this truck that the customer was unaware of. And of course, you might find them somewhat amusing. Hope you enjoy. So I've got the truck here, and like I said, the customer had just bought this truck. It had been told to him that it had been recently rebuilt, so he kind of wanted to see if I could find out if it had been rebuilt. Definitely looks like someone's been in it before. The head doesn't match the rust patterns of anything else, so it looks like the head at least had been off. This is a BXS serial number, but as you can see, it has been updated to a single turbocharger. Pre-cooler has been deleted. Looks like core lines have been removed. I'm not sure if the IVAs are functional or not. Needed to get the valve covers off, though, and when I pulled the intake tube to pull the valve covers, we found this. Oh boy, the whole intake was covered in dirt. Wasn't sure exactly why that was. We don't cover it in this video, but it turned out that the air cleaners that connect and pass through the cab didn't have clamps on one side, which of course, maybe you think they don't need clamps, but if they don't have clamps, they're going to be sucking air unfiltered, and if they're sucking unfiltered air, you're going to have dirt through it. So customer's main concern here was he wanted an overhead done, which I'm not going to really go over the overhead in here as much as the Jakes don't work. Like I said, they are weak, or lazy as I like to call them, Lazy Jake, and they make noise, but they don't do anything. So the question is, how do you troubleshoot them when you also need to do an overhead adjustment? Because if you start the truck and go on a road test, at that point you can't do an overhead or check the valve lash for the Jakes because they have to be cold. The truck was room temperature at this point inside the shop here. So I didn't want to start it up and rev it up and see what it was doing. I kind of wanted to, since I was doing an overhead anyways, see what the valve lash readings were. And if the valve lash wasn't off by much, we know we have an electrical problem. But maybe the valve lash isn't off. I also wanted to see if the IVAs were set, because if I'm going to be doing an overhead, I need to know if the IVAs have been bypassed, which I won't bypass them, but if someone else has messed with them, I'll just leave them alone. So that is one thing I wanted to check here. Obviously, doing a first-person view here, getting the valve covers off. So you can see, get the valve covers off, and this BXS, so they have a separate housing for the IVAs and 340E Jake housings. Now, these are the older style housings, similar to the 3406Es, and one of the big problems I found is the spade terminals that clip onto the solenoids here for the Jakes a lot of times are weak. And we've got our exhaust side. So yeah, you can see that they do have separate housings. BXS are the only ones that have separate IVA housings, and they're kind of a pain because you have to remove the housings to check your valve lash or set it. It is a pain. Not my favorite overhead design. They are probably the hardest to do. So I did end up checking the IVAs, and they were set to 20 thousandths. I did find one of the solenoids was missing part of the plastic retainer, but you can actually just zip tie it on there if you don't want to replace it. It'll work just the same. But yeah, the IVAs were fine, so that got us to the Jakes. Okay guys, so doing the inspection here, I always like to check the Jakes, especially on this one, since the Jakes are a complaint. 33 thousandths is the spec for this. This is a BXS with a 340E Jake heads. 33 thousandths. So I tried a 33 thousandths feeler gauge, which I actually have, which are hard to find actually. But I got this kit from, it's an old Blue Point kit, and it goes up to 35 thousandths with no gaps. Anyway, 30, I don't know if you'll be able to, there you go, 33. Does it fit in the Jakes? Does not. So I tried a 30 thousandths, thinking a lot of guys will just set them to 30 no matter what. If you can see it. Would it fit? No. So I tried a 27, which is the MXS and NXS setting. Did that fit? No, it wouldn't. So I tried a 20. Wouldn't fit either. What size that I have to get to before it would fit, and it's a snug fit. Like, I can't even get the feeler gauge back out. $15 thousandths. 15 thousandths. Now, sometimes jakes will push down a little bit because they're full of fluid, but I don't think that's what's going on here, folks. This 15 thousandths is a huge gap change from, that's less than half of what the settings should be. So I'm not sure how these got set that tight, but they definitely did. This one I can't even get a 15 in. So something's weird with the settings on this. Now, yes, these can fill with fluid and they can act weird, but generally when you slide a feeler gauge in, if it's tight, it'll push that back up, release the fluid, and you should be good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen all these jakes. I'll check the torque here on these hold down bolts, and then I'm going to do a valve adjustment and see what we get. Now, folks, supposedly only 5,000 miles since this was rebuilt. Everything looks pretty clean, what I can see. None of the rocker shafts are on upside down. Have heard of that. But our settings are way off here. So 30 thousandths on our exhaust here. I can't even get it under there at all. It's, you know what they say, light drag. That's kind of subjective. Not really here. It's very tight. Intakes are the same. I'm partially under the foot here, but it just will not go, folks. These are, I checked that intake, that exhaust. They're too tight, so I think what I'm gonna do at this point, since they're more than one is too tight, way too tight actually, I'm just gonna loosen them all and go from there. So I got the engine overhead done there, and the jakes certainly were off, but remember when I said that the jake setting was the problem?
I lied.
Pain. So we've got our solenoids here, and the metal part is actually movable. The engine's obviously not running right now, but see how it's spring loaded? So when the solenoid's on, it pulls down. Now, you can actually check this without the engine running. So we've got the jake switch on, and it's on high. So all three solenoids for the jakes should actuate electrically when engaged. So let's look. So we're gonna do, see, engine brake, retarder brake test. This is under special tests in ET. So let's look at the middle one. Look at that. Now let's look at the forward one. Nothing. What about the rear one? You can hear the middle one still actuating. So that works. So what does that tell us? Well, the ECM is getting a jake signal, but we don't know what signal it's getting. Maybe it's just getting a low signal, which would most likely mean we have a wiring problem to the ECM. So let's go to, look at that. So it's getting a signal just to work on low. Even though the jake settings were really off, we've only got it on low. Which most likely means we have a wiring problem to the ECM, although it is possible we have a bad ECM, but I would say very unlikely. So let's change that. So, jakes are on. It's on high. Let's go to medium. Or sorry, on some Peterbilts, the middle position's actually low, and medium is all the way to the ground. Which, that makes sense, right? No. So look, it's off. So it's not getting a medium signal. So anywho, so we seem to have a wiring problem, folks. The ECM is not seeing a high or medium signal, even though it's getting a low signal. So what does that tell us? It means the solenoids are most likely good. To the jakes. Most likely the wiring's okay. There's also no codes for any jake problems. It's most likely that up to the switch. We got a problem, so let's go from there. Now, in general, I don't like dashboard work because all this stuff is older and likes to crack and fall apart. But what we need to do is check out these switches. Might be some as the pin fell off. Would it be better to go at the ECM first or go here? Kind of you have to do both. However, it's unlikely that the pin in the ECM fell out, although possible. There's more that could go wrong here. You have a moving part. Unlike the ECM, where you really don't. So, this one's missing a screw already. I'm going to try and pull this off, and then pull these out and see what we can see. Okay, so we did find some corrosion, as you can see, on the switch itself here. There are a lot of wires for a 3-position switch, but none of the pins look completely destroyed. I don't see any that are loose or falling out. Not sure. Of course, you have the switch itself. What I should do now, we're getting a low signal. So we know one of these pins goes from here to the ECM to pin 23. And we need to see if the other one goes from pin 40 to one of these pins. If we can get a good reading from pin 40 to one of these pins, that would tell us that we have a good signal here. Now the on-off works, obviously. So the on-off supplies a ground signal to this. And then this one decides, okay, I've got a ground signal in. Where am I going to send it? Am I sending it to the low, medium, or both? So we know it's getting a ground side signal because it's getting it from the on-off switch for the jakes. So what I'm thinking is either the switch is bad or the wiring from the ECM to here. So let's get our voltmeter and see if we can find out what's going on. Alright folks, so pull the connector off here. Now folks, if we have a possibility of damage, is it more likely inside the cab or down here in the underhood area for corrosion or damage to the wiring? Obviously a bit down here. You've got rub-throughs, you've got rocks hitting stuff, things that are leaning against things, and one thing I always like to do is find the wire you're looking for, make sure it's clean. So these are numbered 40 pin. And it's the third one up. So this one, this one, this one. It's this guy here. Okay. The one thing I like to do is just look, visually inspect. Now, at some point you can't look without stripping off so much conduit. It's crazy. But if you look real closely, well, not that closely, but look at this. The wire is gone in a whole section here. Not sure what happened there. It either rubbed on something or a rock hit it, and it literally just corroded off. So you actually don't even have any wire right here. It's gone. So that is almost certainly our problem. It's generally why I don't like throwing parts at stuff, because it's usually something simple. It's almost always something simple, especially on a jake switch thing like this. I've changed switches before, and usually when you change a switch and you're not sure it's the switch, it's not the switch. So yeah, we found wiring's bad here. So what I'm going to do, we've got two options. We could cut it here and splice in. Then you would have kind of two splices. If I've got enough cable here and it's not corroded, I'll try that with a heat shrink. If not, what I'm going to do is cut it back here and then run a new pigtail. So you don't have two splices. You don't want splice, splice. You'd rather have either one splice or one splice to new wire. I do have new Deutsch pins here. Got a lot of them. So let's cut this back and we'll see if it's a lot of corrosion in here. I'll probably have to cut it back here and then run a new pigtail. Okay, so this is where knowing what you're doing will come in handy. So We had to cut out the section. The wiring actually is not corroded at all, really. Basically cut it back. We removed maybe an inch section there. As you can see, it's not corroded either way. The problem is the gap. So could you butt connect this? Yes, you could. The problem would be that section of wire then is going to be pulling on the connector. It needs to get routed here with the other wiring, which you're going to have about that much gap between the two pieces. So at that point, if it was that much, it would work. I could even put a Deutsch pin and a Deutsch pin, put them together and heat shrink them. But with that much gap, we're just going to have to run a new little lead here. So I'm going to pull this out, or run a new lead, and it'll be good as good. So how's it look? Look at that. Fully heat shrink, connected solidly. We've got a new end here, crimped properly with a barrel crimper. It's right length also. Now these do just push in, and then they'll stay. Yep, if you look. Number 40, right in place. Now you might say, how did you get it out? Well, hard to film that, but look at that contour, very good. Not gonna get hit again, we'll zip tie that also. In order to get these out of the connector, which I've got a video on separately, you need a Deutsch pin removal tool, which is this little plastic guy. And it basically slides over, and then there's little teeth inside the connector, and it removes it. That's the kind you need for this. If you're doing a pin like this, which is much different, you'll pull the tab off here, and then there's a little finger, and you can use like a pocket screwdriver. But these type, the multi-pins, where you have a lot of pins, you have to use that type. And then the crimper you need to use, there's a very big Deutsch style crimper, but I've used this one. It's a tool aid. You can see the part number there, 18880. And if you look at how the crimp is, it's at 4 positions at one time. I've used this on probably hundreds of wires. Great tool to have if you're doing anything with cat wiring. That's really the only tools you need. So now what we can do is hook this back up after I zip tie that and see if it's working. Now folks, it's funny what you'll see sometimes. Electrically, you'll see all sorts of crazy stuff. And usually I just try to ignore it. You know, you have connectors here and stuff. Just stuff you've seen from, you know, this truck's 20 years old at least. But when I was putting the connector on, I noticed this. This is coming right off the starter. Yes, that is what you think it is. That is 2 bare wires wrapped together. Just relaxing. I believe they're power also. Yeah, that, my guess is something that was kind of a spur of the moment thing that got forgotten. Now it sits there like that. So I'm gonna fix that while I'm here. I don't, you know, the customer didn't specifically say, but I'm sure he would hate to be somewhere in the middle in a rainstorm at 2 in the morning and his truck doesn't start because I didn't do anything with that. So we're gonna fix that, and let's go check the jakes. All right guys, so as you can see, now it's showing high, not just low, which is telling me I believe our problem is fixed with the jakes. So let's test our solenoids now. Now we don't know how long they've been like this. Could have been for years, but let's do our solenoid test. Oh yeah, look. That's number 1. Two, 3. We fixed it. Look at that. Something simple. Pretty interesting. Oh, running now. good. He asked if there's a pyrometer, which there's a gauge for it, but there's no pyrometer port.